Hi, my name is Roxanne Moore, and this is my report for Art 503 on Josephine Carson Locke. Josephine Carson Locke, March 31st, 1851, in Ireland, to parents of Irish and British descent, Susan Carson and John M. Locke. There are many documents, reports, and newspaper articles that give us a small peek into the public life of Josephine Carson Locke. However, her early childhood and personal life remain a bit of a mystery. Locke received her training at the Massachusetts State Normal Arts School as a result of the passing of the Drawing Act of 1870. One person who had a great influence on Locke's idea of drawing in the schools was Walter Smith. Walter Smith became the director of drawing and director of art education for the state of Massachusetts. Smith had a vision to send out many teachers to educate others about art. This vision eventually led to the beginning of the Massachusetts Normal Art School, which opened in 1873. Smith had a specific drawing plan that included 3 years of drawing in the primary grades, 6 years in the grammar schools, and then 4 years in the high schools. Josephine Locke gave credit to Smith's work by describing it as a milestone in the evolution of drawing instruction. Locke was also inspired by the philosophers Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, and Amos Bronson Alcott. Locke shared Emerson's belief and connected to the fine arts and handcrafts for children. Another major influence on Locke was William Torrey Harris, a transcendentalist that became the superintendent of the St. Louis Public Schools in St. Louis in 1868. He was a major intellectual leader that made a big impression on Locke and her philosophy. Both Locke and Harris believed more in the cultivation of sense perception in childhood and saw it as essential versus the severe mechanical and memorization. Locke was in agreement with Harris and believed that the arts were serious and worth of the human soul, and not just for sheer amusement. Locke was also influenced by Friedrich Froebel, a German educator who founded the kindergarten in 1837. Locke adopted Froebel's theories and applied them to drawing instruction by borrowing the idea that there was an interconnectedness of nature, that the child is an organic whole being, learning and growing through creative self-activity, and that the child is a self-expressive being. In 1882, Locke wrote in her annual report for the St. Louis Public Schools about her advocacy in learning through doing, and encouraged other modes of expression besides writing and speaking. Locke had a holistic approach to her ideology and believed that the child was a whole and developed through creativity and self-activity. She was a strong believer in allowing children to use their imagination to guide developmentally appropriate instruction from the concrete to the more abstract. Locke was the supervisor of drawing in the St. Louis Public Schools from around 1882 to 1883. During that time, her philosophy of education towards a more romantic ideology was realized. The manual training movements allowed Locke to build upon this movement trend in education, a rise in social conscience supported by the hands-on approach. She also believed that people could only obtain satisfaction in life by thoughtful self-reflection of their actions and achievements in life, and that true joy could only be found in merging the mundane with the imagination. This ideology set up Locke for what she would eventually do. While in St. Louis, Locke had 3 basic aspects of education that she wanted to improve. First, she wanted to give teachers the tools they needed to implement the teaching of drawing. Second, she wanted to expand the current flat, two-dimensional view of art education to one of a more hands-on, three-dimensional, expressive, and creative approach. And finally, she wanted to develop the whole child through active learning to reach each child. Many of these ideas developed by Locke were eventually identified as progressive education. St. Louis was not quite ready for Locke's views, which were seen by critics as going a bit too full tilt. This eventually caused Josephine Locke to move to Chicago. In 1888, Locke moved to Chicago and had the opportunity to work with Colonel Francis Wayland Parker at the Cook County Normal School. Colonel Parker was quoted years later by Professor of Pedagogy John Dewey at the Chicago University as being the father of the progressive education. Parker, as well as Locke, believed in Froebel's ideas that students should study nature firsthand and not through a textbook, and that a community of caring such as the environment to be found in the kindergarten could develop and grow a child's desire to do good in the world. Colonel Parker believed in hiring on the best of the Cook County Normal School, and Josephine Locke was one of those teachers. During her 3 years there, Locke used drawing as a language and integrated it with other areas of thinking to communicate feelings and thoughts. Students would write written responses to the drawings they did to express what it was they were noticing and observing. Locke's main purpose and goal through this was not a fine arts emphasis, but instead a means to develop the intelligence of her students in order to eventually prepare them to teach in the public schools. In 1891, Locke became the supervisor of drawing for the elementary grades of the Chicago public schools. Locke oversaw more than 93,000 students and more than 100 school buildings. Locke made many changes to the current system which he considered quite antiquated. Like Colonel Parker and John Dewey, Locke based the teaching on drawing on children's interests, feelings, and imaginations. She said the best approach asks, how do children see? How do they feel? What is their imagination busy with? Locke valued and saw the importance of students' expression of individuality in their work versus precise accuracy and detail that came about from copying renderings from a textbook. Locke's approach was more engaging and interactive, terms that we use freely now as art educators. Students were encouraged to go outside and draw nature from observation, to build with their hands, to listen to stories and attempt to draw from their imaginations. Locke even encouraged students to do poses for one another and do quick sketches of those poses. Locke was directly in line with continuing to nurture the child's imagination and create hands-on learning experiences towards building the whole child. Locke supported doing and making versus listening and reciting. In Locke's efforts to transform education, she encountered many obstacles, such as financial instability with the board, unrealistic expectations from parents, high costs of materials, overcrowding, and lack of needed drawing staff and art specialists to help teach. In 1893, Locke found herself entangled in what was called the War of Fads, a battle to eliminate subjects such as foreign language, music, and art. This struggle began to Locke's purpose of art education to survive in the public school. She needed to justify its purpose. In order to keep the arts alive in the school, she devised a method of reading, writing, and other subjects. Locke's focus on this method was to de-emphasize the results and to focus more on process. While this new approach was a good start, Locke also wanted the citizens to have a way to become better acquainted with the schools. In 1895, Locke accepted an invitation from the Art Institute of Chicago director William M.R. French to use this prestigious museum to exhibit students' works in their galleries. This was an unprecedented move by Locke, and nothing like it had ever been done before. Locke was well aware of the risks to do something like this, and the public scrutiny that she would face. However, she felt strongly about this action in elevating the cause of showing the general public what the students were doing in the Chicago public schools. The children's exhibition became a new tradition at the Art Institute of Chicago, with continued showings in 1896, 1897, 1899, 1900, and 1901. The exhibits of children's work at the Art Institute of Chicago were well received, drawing thousands of visitors, loved by many. Several news publications spoke highly of this endeavor, and specifically spoke to the quality of drawing instruction at the Chicago public schools. The exhibits at the Art Institute of Chicago were indeed a great source of inspiration for teachers and their students. The anticipated effects of these exhibits of children's work Locke could not have predicted, but by 1886 the Art Institute of Chicago began teaching Saturday drawing, painting, modeling, and design classes to those connected with the public schools, an opportunity to study art further. Teachers were so ready to gain knowledge and understanding in art that by 1908 the Art Institute of Chicago Bulletin said that a third of all the Chicago public school teachers were members of the Saturday evening schools. Locke had successfully contributed to Chicago public schools as well as the Art Institute of Chicago. By 1916, Locke could best be described as a progressive, pragmatic in nature, who saw the utilitarian value of art instruction. Locke was also a romantic who felt that children possessed an inherent way unique only to them, that needed to be released through creativity. One could even say that Locke was ahead of her time, as she foreshadowed 20th century theories of researchers such as Howard Gardner, Jerome Bruner, Jean Piaget, Abraham Maslow, James Gallagher, and Victor Lowenfeld. This isn't to suggest that these philosophers were influenced by Locke's work, but that they did share similarities. For example, just as Locke spoke of modes of expression in the 1800s, 100 years later, Howard Gardner introduced his theory of multiple intelligences. Locke and Gardner both recognized that approaches to learning helped develop a well-rounded individual of high intelligence. In 1900, Locke left her position within the district. To this day, her disappearance is somewhat of a mystery, although other publications suggest things like the basic need for a new view on life after a general fatigue and weariness. Overwork and a desire to cultivate the imagination and creative expression in the schools had taxed the genius and strength of the drawing department to its utmost. To assume just one reason for Locke leaving is too singular a thought for someone who so clearly brought about much and important changes in art education. Since Locke never married, it freed herself up to pursue many other interests, including a long list of diverse organizations. She was a committee member of the NEA, involved in the Western Drawing Teachers Association, and a member of the Committee of 10, to name a few. Locke's love for art also took her across the country and around the world on several occasions. She had a passion for the Japanese culture, and it moved her to sponsor missionary work there. With the Women's International Fellowship League, Locke spoke before the Chicago Teachers Federation, where she was very vocal that women needed to take a stand for their own lives as teachers, and that their own voices needed to be heard in the making of their curriculum. Josephine Carson Locke was one of the art educators with courage enough to act on her professional ideals and to help change the focus of art education in American public schools. The ideas that Locke worked so hard to implement, that she was so devoted to tirelessly as her years as the director of art, are now generally accepted as basic in modern education. This truly was the main legacy left behind of Josephine Carson Locke. She not only made art democratic because she provided access for children to art, but because she also tore down the restrictions that dictated what those outcomes should look like. Locke's aim was never to make an artist of the masses, but instead to lay the foundations of a broad and liberal and their internal growth. Why is it then that Locke fell into such obscurity? Why do we not know more about her? Some suggest that Locke fell off of the history radar because she never published a work like John Dewey's Art is Experience. Another thought is that her practical achievements were overshadowed by scientific research interests of later educators who had a new educational mindset, such as behavioral psychology and scientific intelligence. Whatever the reason, Locke herself saw her own work as not a final statement on elementary education or on art instruction, but as ongoing. Locke's vision of art education was seen within the bigger picture of education. Locke's absence from the history books merely points to the fact that today's educators still face the same challenges regarding legitimizing art education in the public schools, or that Locke's work in successfully implementing art with elementary age students wasn't entirely unsuccessful either. It also suggests that American society today still resists the acknowledgement of art on the same basis as other disciplines. Whether or not Locke achieved all her goals during her time is less important than the fact that Locke's tenacity points to the importance of how far educators pursue their dreams and visions depends on how deeply they are committed to their ideas. Locke's career in philosophy developed over time, over strong convictions, and about seeing a way to develop the genius that she saw within each child. That is a legacy worth remembering, and an idea art educators today need to push forward with, so that art will not only continue to stay in the public schools, but thrive along with other subjects. I have wanted to see, to have art education